Hey there, friend. Good to see you again. Game of Thrones, huh? I know I said last month or whatever before the show came back that it was probably going to be disappointing in some aspects, but I never would have dreamed in a million years that it would have tanked like it did. Years and years from now, I'm going to be sitting at the dinner table with my whole family, a wife, children, and they'll be talking about their day and their hopes and dreams, and I'll just look up from the table and I'll sigh. Guys, Game of Thrones was a travesty. Oh my god, Dad, we know. No, you don't. I know I missed the boat by a couple of weeks, but here I am still with my Thrones hot take. There's a lot of criticism online being directed towards David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, the two showrunners and creative spearheads of the Game of Thrones TV show. People saying they're lazy, egotistical, and I find it hard to disagree. When I first heard that it was Dan and Dave that made the decision to shorten the show, quicken the pacing, and at the end of the day, kind of screw up the whole thing, I was blaming them too. If you're into the show and this kind of stuff, then you've seen the memes and stuff by now. Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet. We kind of forgot about good writing. The story on the internet, at least, is that Dan and Dave wanted to bail quicker to move on to greener pastures, such as the Star Wars franchise. And that's really screwing them in hindsight, because the writing is really the only thing that tanked so hard these last couple years. The sets, costumes, acting, cinematography, effects, music, it's all better than it ever has been. All the criticism is really directed towards things that had to do with the writing. Rushed pacing, people acting out of character, being trapped between Winterfell and King's Landing, the kind of lack of scale, unsatisfying payoffs to stuff, little conveniences, the list goes on. It's all writing stuff. It just begs the question of, if you didn't want to continue writing the show, then why not hand it off to somebody else? Maybe it's a pride thing. But we now know that the half measure of cutting the last few seasons short really didn't pay off. In all fairness, I don't think Dan and Dave, the showrunners, deserve all the blame for the show tanking. These guys did sign up to adapt a series of novels, not to write it from scratch. Granted, nobody could have predicted how stark the difference was going to be, but who put them in that position in the first place? None other than everybody's favorite, gigantic, old, lazy author, George R.R. Martin. I was always under the impression that Dan and Dave met with George, 10 years ago or whatever, under the pretense that the show would never outrun the novels. But that's not the world we live in. George R.R. Martin goes to festivals and cons and gives interviews every day and writes other books and, has a personal life. People complain that all the best lines and moments in the show took place in the first half and were all ripped from the book. They ran out of material to adapt, and they deserve a lot of credit for weaving that shit together in a way that cut the fat but stayed true to the source material. Especially making my way through the novels now, I've developed a real respect and appreciation for the show's ability to cut things and blend things as necessary to fit it into an HBO television show, but also remain true to the same core story. I didn't know when they were doing the first season of Game of Thrones, when the last book came out, that we still wouldn't have the next one by now. At the end of the day, they did totally screw the pooch and make decisions that ruined the show, almost. But I just don't think they deserve all the blame. I think George needs to finish that book. Anyways, the ending of the show was pretty lame. Most people watching it felt that way, it seems like. But there's something else I wanted to talk about today. And that is the wealth of content that has emerged online in the wake of the finale, slamming the show. And I love that stuff. I'm something of a YouTube armchair critic myself sometimes. But in the wake of all this Thrones criticism and Thrones content online, there's something that I noticed that I wanted to bring up. If you're into Thrones and this kind of stuff, then you might have seen some videos in your feed recently titled, How Game of Thrones Should Have Ended. My version of the ending of Game of Thrones. Let's rewrite the Game of Thrones finale. How I would have wrote Season 8 of Game of Thrones. It's not that I think that kind of content is, trash, but it's not exactly critical thinking about the text or, criticism of the episode, is it? There's a difference between critical thinking and, criticizing a piece of art and, fan fiction. You can look at a movie or a TV show or whatever as it is and, form your subjective opinion about all the various aspects of it. Whereas going on about your personal ideal version of the story is just kind of pissing in the wind, I think. What I'm saying is filmmaking is a real complicated and collaborative process, involves many people making lots of decisions and compromises, especially in something like Game of Thrones, which is one of the biggest TV shows ever made. There's no way that you and me on YouTube could ever know the intricacies of how any one aspect of the show turned out the way that it did. So while there's nothing wrong with imagining and writing about your favorite characters and your own perfect version of the story, it just doesn't really add to the critical discussion of the text. I just think it's a little bit naive and just totally impossible for any one person to know how they would have handled things if they were in the shoes of the showrunners. Again, not that there's anything wrong with creative thinking and writing and fans of something interacting with each other and with the thing that they love. It's just not quite the same thing as criticism or critical discussion of the actual text that's there. I don't know, little YouTube pet peeve of mine recently. All right, and I think that's going to about do it for today. Thank you for listening.